One, two, three. One, two, three.
Well, good afternoon. Richard Taylor is my name, and before I welcome you formally, I just want to bring greetings from Chicago. I just came back. I flew in. Governor Maura Healey had a forum on Tuesday at 2, and it was fantastic, big turnout, and she's speaking tonight at 8:15, by the way. So we're excited about her role. Vice President Harris had a major fundraiser in Provincetown last month, and she had one in Western Massachusetts. And the soon-to-be first husband had an event here on the Vineyard a couple weeks ago, and we had the pleasure of attending that. Then on yesterday at noon, the magnificent Speaker for Life, Nancy Pelosi, was interviewed by David Axelrod on her book about power. So Sheena, I flew in last night, got on the boat this morning to be here for you. So things are going well out there. And when you leave here, go to work. Go to work. Keep your foot on the pedal. Now, let me get back to our business. Good afternoon. Richard Taylor is my name. And I want to welcome you to the last of our 2024 Charles Ogletree Public Forums here at Union Chapel. We named it after our good friend, fallen hero much too early, lawyer, civil rights fighter, litigator, and just a wonderful human being. So we keep his memory put up every summer. We've hosted these public forums for about 5 years, offering Vineyard visitors and residents a chance to talk about key issues of the day. We've had forums such as Black Philanthropy, DE&I in Today's World, Health Equity, the Divine Nine Panhellenic Gathering, and more. We are delighted this afternoon to welcome innovator and collaborator Sheena Collier and her team for their inaugural forum here on the island. Give her a hand, please. As the founder of Boston While Black, she has been strategically thoughtful about how people of color in new and sometimes unwelcoming cities and submarkets can work together programmatically to find themselves, enjoy themselves, create community, belonging, and strength to thrive over the long haul. I can recall, Vicki, when we were in school, many of our classmates in Boston in graduate school and college wouldn't even stay for graduation. The city was so rough and tough. It's gotten so much more better with elected officials. We probably have the first or second largest Haitian community in the country. I know we have the largest Brazilian community in the country, and so much diversity, Cape Verdean, African Americans, all over. And so the city has become amazingly exciting and dynamic from cultures, languages, and backgrounds. And Sheena's had a lot to do with how people have found community there. Boston and other markets offer both challenges and opportunities to help people come together. She has assembled an informative panel, and we look forward to their presentation. So I'm now going to turn it over to Candace, and I'm going to sit down and enjoy the show. Come on up. Cut this off. I'm going to move this over here.
Y'all give a round of applause for our host.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's perfect. Yeah, I'm so good. Thank you. My name is Candace Stansel. It is a pleasure to be with you all. My pronouns are she, her, hers. In a professional standpoint, I'm the Chief Equity Officer for the City of Atlanta. I spent about 6 years living in Boston, and it is a joy to be with you all. And I'm so grateful to Richard Taylor. He doesn't know this. I've been to his house many times. He probably doesn't remember, but we're going to talk about belonging and the intentionality of creating it in places and spaces. And I'm so grateful that Sheena and Boston While Black invited me to join this conversation. I'll be moderating. And I'm going to let our panel introduce themselves, because I think that's oftentimes how you get to know people the best. And the question that we'll start with in just a moment is talking about a time where you felt like you belonged, where you understood it and you knew it clearly. So we'll come back to that. But before we get started, I think we've got a little bit of opportunity for you all to engage with us. We want to know a little bit about who's in the room. So I'm going to ask the team to show our first question up on the screen. And I'll talk a little bit about why we're here as you answer that. So there's a text code, there's a QR code. And the first question I want to know is really, when you think about places where you belong, what words come to mind? So just drop those words in the chat or in your text or box. Give folks a couple of seconds, you'll be able to see the responses.
I think folks need to go back to the last screen. Yeah.
Yes, right there. Give folks a moment, yeah. But the question is, when you think of a place where you belong, and you'll see this on your screen, what words come to mind? So I'll give you all a few minutes to respond. And I'll share, as the panel will, a story of belonging. And it's actually about my first time on the Vineyard. It's probably 15 years ago. As I said, I'm from Atlanta. I was living in Atlanta at the time. I've lived in Phoenix, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Boston, D.C., Memphis, Greenwood, Mississippi. I think I got them all. And so I know what it is to drop into somewhere. And I came here solo. I didn't know anybody. I'd never been to the Vineyard. I was by myself. And the Reds, who many of you know, Judge Red, he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Atlanta." And he said, "Oh, all of my daughters are there." Turned out I knew all his kids already. And he showed me around this island and helped me to find my way as a solo individual, just kind of wandering. I immediately felt seen. He cared about what I wanted from my experience here. He didn't just tell me all the things he loved about the island. He said, "Well, what are you hoping to do while you're here?" That's what belonging feels like, when someone takes the time to intentionally make space for you. And so Boston While Black and the work that they do is about how we intentionally make space, and that's going to be our conversation today. Lots of words coming up: family, home, comfortable, comfort, safe, right? And so those are the feelings we're looking for in this conversation. How do we get there? And what responsibility do organizations, municipalities, nonprofits have in that. I'm going to move us to our next question really quickly before I turn it over to them. Let's see who's here. So where do you live? Give us your city and town. You got some Atlanta love up here, some Boston love, some New York love. Where is everybody in here from? Rhode Island. Drop it in. Yeah. Yes, I am quite familiar, one of my best friends from Vermont, same thing. Yeah. Let's see. We've got Roxbury. Oh, Memphis in the house. D.C., Boston, New York. I'll let y'all keep filling that in. And I'm actually going to open up with my colleagues, and we'll do a couple more questions. But I want to let you all first talk about this intentionality we're trying to create and when you've experienced it. So we'll answer intros, and then we'll let Andre ground us in a few things. But before that, talk about a time where you felt like you belonged, Andre, when you knew, and introduce yourself to the folks.
Yes, first of all, thank Candace, and thanks, Richard, for your leadership. It's always a pleasure to be in such austere places. But I'm Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. I study Black majority cities and neighborhoods. The story of belonging is my origin story. As the story was told to me, before I was born, there was a deal made between a woman by the name of Elsie Boyd, I call her Mom, and my maternal grandmother. At the time, my mother was very poor. She was probably abused. My father was a heroin addict. He was in and out of prison. He was eventually murdered inside the Jackson State Penitentiary right outside of Detroit. But she took me and my older brother in. She took in about probably between 12 to 15 kids of varying durations. Some would stay a few months, some would stay a few years. I would stay from birth to I graduated from high school. But it was clear that you make home. I have brothers and sisters who are not related to me at all. I have civic brothers and sisters who are not related to me, and that drives a lot of my work. But the story of belonging is why I'm here.
Thank you. Sheena, talk about a time where you knew you belonged.
Wonderful. First, I just want to say good afternoon. So humbled to be here. Thank you so much to Richard and the Charles Ogletree series for allowing us space on the stage, and Candace, Andre, and Doug for being in conversation with me. As was said, I'm Sheena Collier. I'm the founder and CEO of Boston While Black, and we are the leading connector for community culture and belonging for Black people in Boston. We do that through curating digital in-person spaces that help to transform the Black experience in the city. And a big part of that is in partnership with corporations, higher ed, local government, as a way to extend their belonging efforts and really give them a vehicle for authentically investing in the Black experience. And we've been doing that for the past 4 years and look forward to continuing on. When I talk about Boston While Black and the origin, I talk about the story of moving from Albany, New York, but going to Spelman. All right, Albany. Wait a minute, I never got that in a crowd before. Okay. Going from Spelman, where I went to undergrad, to Harvard for grad school. I have so many friends in here. So that's kind of my story I tell. That's what's on our website. But really, where I really have felt belonging, a deep sense of belonging, was home in Albany. And it's becoming clearer and clearer to me, even as I do this work, how much that foundation was set for me. I grew up in a way where I just was steeped in Black culture. And there was, I think, what it was really important about it and what carries into my work now is that I didn't feel like I had to choose between my professional, social, civic, kind of personal self. A lot of it was very integrated from my parents and the way that I grew up. I'm the youngest of 8, so my parents were a lot older. My father was at the March on Washington. He organized with A. Philip Randolph, and we just had a spirit of civic engagement in our house at all times that looked different ways. Sometimes it looked like actual organizing. He was a leader in the union for Black state workers in New York State. It also looked like parties. We had a lot of parties at our house, and our cookouts included the comptroller for the state, who was a Black man, our city councilors who were Black. You know, my father played poker on weekends with the city councilors. Like, I never felt a separation between those different parts of my lives, and always felt like that was just part of growing up. As far as on my mother's side, we're an AME church family, and so my first grade teacher, Mrs. Hill, went to church with my family. I had a Black woman elementary school principal, and my school really served as this hub. It probably was 99% Black, and really served as a hub for everything that I did. So I did Girl Scouts there. When my parents broke up, I went to a social worker there. I watched Roots there. Like, it really was, the foundation for my life. And I didn't even really cherish it until I left and realized how much I was steeped in belonging, because everyone saw me, and I was really able to thrive even in a place where people weren't always thriving, because I had that deep sense of belonging and being seen.
Thank you, Sheena. Doug.
Hello, everyone. How we doing today? Okay, all right. Is there a collection plate? No? Okay. Oh, wrong. Okay, different. Oh, that's in an hour. Okay. My name's Doug Melville. Thank you so much for all coming out this afternoon to hear us speak and work together collaboratively on this conversation. I guess what I would say, I grew up in Connecticut, Bridgeport, Connecticut. Is that on the list? No? Okay. Second page, third page. Okay, good. All right, good. But I grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and for those that you know, Bridgeport is a historically Black city and a state that doesn't necessarily celebrate that particular culture. I graduated from Syracuse University and started working with different entertainers to help them create their passion projects. And in 2006, I was approached by Irvin Magic Johnson to join his team. And I was 27 years old. I became the president of one of his companies and his head of business development. And that was the first time that I ever worked for a Black CEO. And I think sometimes you just, really don't realize what you don't know until you don't know. It was not like my other work environments were negative in any way, but there was a certain level of connection. In 2012, has anybody here ever seen the movie Red Tails? Does anybody, by show of hands? Okay. Does everybody else not have cable? Just checking. No, I'm just checking, guys. I'm just checking. I don't know your subscription services, but in 2012, I was invited to a screening of a movie, the Red Tails screening, and my grandfather, General Benjamin O. Davis Jr., was the commander and the creator of the Tuskegee Airmen. Thank you. And when the lights turned dim, and the theater got dark, and they started to roll the movie, and he was portrayed by an actor, Terrence Howard. And when he came onto the screen, the name was changed. And I would come to later find out the names of all the men were changed to not pay the family's royalties. So I would dig a little deeper and started looking into the story of Henrietta Lacks, the Green Book, the Black family wasn't paid. Devotion, the Black family wasn't paid, Hidden Figures, the families weren't paid. I started to look into all these different environments, and I left my job with Mr. Johnson, and I became a chief diversity officer to help ensure that we could make the invisible visible, because sometimes we wait for other people to kind of help us. But I think talks like this, and even all your participation on this beautiful sunny day, really show that we have to be the leaders, and we have to create the environments, the cities that we want to believe. At that moment, I started researching my family story and became an author. I wrote a book called Invisible Generals, which is a story of America's first two Black generals, a father and a son, Ben Davis Sr. and Jr., my grandfather and great-grandfather, and started writing for Forbes. I recently wrote an article about Martha's Vineyard a few weeks ago and that really was because of a feeling I had after being here. There's something so warm about this environment that it really just moves you to kind of be collaborative and collective in nature. And today I'm the CEO of an inclusive AI company, and I think this is kind of one of the things we're going to talk about today, but AI is a technology that currently has the power of 3 to 10 PhD level brains. So if we don't start participating in these processes, these brains are calculating and using algorithms to create answers. And I helped start a company called Jody which stands for Justice, Opportunity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. It spells Jody. And what we do is we try to ensure inclusive AI, make sure answers have our voice, have our perspective, have our research, have our data. And I think it's so important that when we talk these large-scale conversations, sometimes we have to be a hybrid of different things as long as we know the vision.
Awesome. So you all can see we're in for a treat, right? We're going to give space to Andre to talk a little bit about data, and I think we all know that part of what we're hoping to do is to learn to measure the impact of this work. And so he spends his brilliant career thinking about this, and we want to give him about 10 minutes or so to share some slides, so you'll see them on the screen. And then we'll come back with a couple of questions because I'm curious about, as you all, some people are already answering, how well you think the city you live in is actually creating spaces where Black people belong. But we'll come back to that after we hear some of his data. Andre, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to stand up. Again, I'm Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, and I'm going to share with you some data on life expectancies. With the NAACP, we created a platform called the Black Progress Index. If you can go forward with the slide. Really looking at the places where Black people are living the longest. The theory is, there's a lot of theories out there around belonging, well-being. We certainly look at wealth. The assumption is if you are in a state of belonging, high level of belonging, you should have better outcomes. The ultimate outcome is longevity, how long you live. So we actually wanted to measure where are the places where Black people are doing well, if you could advance this slide. Now, what we did to get to this, right now, because of technology, you can actually scrub every database you can get, and that's what we did. Put them in a machine learning algorithm called Lasso, and developed what we call a regression analysis, and to get at what are the most important factors in life expectancy. So we went through real estate data, FBI data around crime. We went through marriage data, Facebook, all the different databases you can get to find the most important factors that lead to longevity. If we can go to the next slide. And it led to this dashboard. Don't do it now, but you could look at the Black Progress Index. You can type in any county in the country, county and metropolitan area in the country, and you can get the average life expectancy in that place. Here is the national data. On average, Black people across the nation live to about 74.4 years of age. 74.4. Now, what we did in this project, we compared Black people to Black people. Why do we do that? And we did it across place. Why not compare Black to white? Well, when you compare Black to white, it masks the variation in place. So as you will see, that life expectancy varies widely by the place you live. Some places people are thriving, other places not so much. But here's the national picture. Now I'm just going to go next slide, just to show you the factors that are included. Now I'm going to go through these very quickly because some of them are surprising and some of them are not so much. So the first one is a little surprising for most. The number one predictor of life expectancy in a county is the share of Black immigrants in that county, right? Now, there's some, factors in just because of the sheer number. Black immigrants in general are wealthier and healthier than their counterparts, and so just the number, the compositional effect will impact that number. But what we also found is that Black Americans, durable Black Americans living next to immigrants actually live longer. So this narrative that immigrants are taking away, that's actually not true. That's not true. The next factor, we generally know, most people know, that incomes are high, people live longer. No surprise there. Home ownership rates, right? And I want to be clear about this. The difference is not just affordability, but home ownership. When the higher percentage of people who own a home in a county, people live longer. The next two, again, very intuitive, education. As education rates go up, both at the K-12 level and at the higher education level, a life expectancy goes up. In general, the theory is you make better decisions, choices, and you have access to the various markets that encourages longevity. Walkability is another factor. When you have communities where you walk naturally from work to play, you live longer. Now here's the one that's surprising, the distance of your Facebook friends in a county. Right now, we literally can add up where your friends live and measure the miles, the distance. The places where there's longer friends networks, they live longer. Now, some of that's intuitive. When you have a highly educated populace, people move, and they have friends all over the place. But the point here is social networks matter mightily. Now, here's one that's a little surprising, business ownership rates. When we own businesses, people live longer. That was a little bit of a surprise, because I didn't think that part. But particularly for the descendants of the enslaved, owning a business carries something different, right? Now, here goes the negative correlates, and I'm going to breeze through this. Some of you are going to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But air pollution, no surprise there. When air quality is bad, people don't live as long. Population density, this is actually a surprise, because most places that there's a dense population, you have better educational opportunities, better job opportunities. People have access to that. But for black people, it's a negative correlate, which probably means that there's some segregation or a lack of access to those opportunities. Now, this one is no surprise, the share of the population not living with their father. Now, what we found is black fathers spend as much time with their children as their white and Latino counterparts. However, when you split a household, guess what? You drop income, and it has a negative effect. Now, here's the one I always got to be careful, particularly in a place like this, right? The share of religious adherents, church members, the higher the percentage of church members, the lower the life expectancy. Now, hold on. I saw they grabbing the hymnals.
We're going to wrap it up now. We're wrapping it up.
Propaganda, see? Right. Now, so again, you see that? Now, that's right. Now so there are some compositional effects. In general, churchgoers are more likely to be obese. And if you say, Jesus, take the wheel for everything, it's not necessarily conducive for health outcome. But those are not, in my opinion, those are not the main reasons. What I think is happening is that church members are going into their places of worship suffering. That these communities are already under duress. In medicine, there's this thing called allostatic load, meaning that when you're in stressful environments, it erodes your livelihood. That happens at a community level. So the good thing is when people come to church, you have a captive audience. It's a political opportunity. It's a health opportunity. But people are stressed in our church communities. And finally, firearm fatalities. Not only does it take away years of life, like literally taking away life, but the stress around those communities are also eroding. Now, next slide. I just want to show you briefly some outcomes. In Boston, 5 years longer than the average. On average, folks in Boston, black folks live to 79 years of age, right? So, and this is one of the things I'm always, in every city, I say this, that the conditions on the ground are not perfect. But you have a much greater opportunity in Boston to create the condition for longevity than in other places. Next slide. Montgomery County, Maryland, 81.1, right? Next slide. Where I live, Prince George, I saw Prince George's County, right? Around 78. So not bad, right? Next slide. Atlanta, 76, still above the average, getting a little lower. Next slide. Baltimore City, less than 70, less than 70, right? Baltimore is maybe 40 minutes from Montgomery County, right? Now, the difference is, next slide, this is my closing slide. The dark purple represents higher life expectancy. The light purple reveals lower life expectancy. You can see in the South, folks are not living their natural lifespan. But the theory here is, one, you can measure, and this is just one example, the conditions on the ground and their impact on life. Two, what makes the dark purple different from the light purple? What we do as a collective. The civic action in, like Prince George's County doesn't have to have these outcomes. Montgomery County doesn't have to have these outcomes. People are doing work, and it's coming out of the wash in life expectancy. And we can learn from these places where a lot people are living longer and apply them in other places. So that's my presentation, just to give people a sense that you can do something about your well-being, your belonging, your longevity. You can do this, and it can have a quantitative, qualitative impact on our lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Andre. And I think, and we're going to get into a discussion about that because many of you were probably surprised by some of those statistics, right? I live in Atlanta. The narrative around Atlanta is, I mean, it is the place for Black folks, right? Like, and it is in many ways. There's lots of reasons that it is for other reasons. But how we create spaces that affirm you, allow you life expectancy, give you psychological safety, give you a sense of belonging, that requires a lot of different intention. So we're going to talk about some of the models that do that, right? And we'll start with Sheena reflecting on, as she heard Andre's data, as she's experiencing what she's seeing in Boston, as she's thinking about how you might scale a model that could help places do this more effectively. What are the things you're seeing? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I always love seeing, and as Andre said, you can go on the site and plug in different counties, and it's really fascinating to see the differences. What I think about when I see the Boston statistics and hear at least what the data shows about Boston, it makes me wonder, why do Black people still have the perception, why do we still feel like Boston is not a place where we belong? If the data is showing that we live longer there, we're having better outcomes around a number of different indicators, and I think it's embedded in some of those determinants, but a lot of what Boston While Black is trying to address, and what we talk about a lot of, what are the other factors, the almost kind of unseen things that have to do with psychological safety, that have to do with your sense of belonging or feeling seen. I gave that story of how I grew up and how I felt this deep sense of belonging, and my father never owned a home. And like a lot of these other factors that are on here, we actually probably didn't, we didn't meet, we didn't have some of these positive factors, but I still hold on to that as a place where I've felt the most seen and sense of belonging. And so I think some of the work that we're trying to do is, how do we integrate these two things, where we have data and numbers that show this is what Black progress looks like, because we need to look at what's going well to be able to scale it and replicate it. The reason that I've always been attracted to Andre's research is because I really dislike the constant focus on disparity when it comes to Black people and how we're always viewed through that lens. It does a lot it impacts us, even in the way we see ourselves and each other, and it impacts how the world sees us. People don't see us as worth it, So I think that it's important for us to be able to see this to say, okay, how do we replicate a Prince George's County or a Boston, et cetera, and how do we also account for the things that we maybe don't know how to measure yet? And I feel like having a deep sense of belonging is one of those things. And so in the work that we've done of not only of serving Black people specifically, so we have the membership community where Black people are able to join and get connected to each other, get connected to resources, information. I mentioned that we partner with a number of different institutions. But the reason we're grounding it in a place, because we could just have While Black, we could just have a Black community of people, is because I, from the beginning, thought it was really important for our connection to place, spatial justice, placemaking, all of these things to show up, because we know that those, even as we continue to be in a more digital world, that in-person connection, that grounding in where we are is really important to our sense of self. And so as cities are, you know, as they should be focused on growing industry and businesses, addressing the housing crisis that many of our cities are facing, and all of the other factors that are important social determinants for our health as well as other folks' health. We also have to be, cities also should be looking at what's the social infrastructure that's needed in this city that really pays attention to the experience that people are having. We think of it, you know, particularly through the Black experience, but it's really across the board, that there has to be some paying attention to how people are experiencing this place, how are they moving around, gathering with each other, how do they see themselves reflected. I felt a deep sense of belonging because my elementary school principal was a Black woman. So I knew, like, oh, I mean, I got my master's in education because of her. Because I knew that that was something, it was something I saw from a young age, so I knew it was something that I could do. And I'm really hoping that along with data and research, you know, practice, that we're able to put more serious discipline behind belonging. You know, it's even why we call this a blueprint for belonging, because I really believe it's something that can be measured and scaled if we really think about, along with the factors that are less out of our control, that are more about the places that we live, what are the things that we can actually control to create this blueprint for belonging, and how do we take a model like ours and like others and really create in the way that we're acting like a hub for all of these pieces of the ecosystem that need to work together.
And I really appreciate Shani bringing at the end the ecosystem, right? Because BWB is thinking about that. Cities and governments should be thinking about the infrastructure. Who do we invite to our city, right? When businesses say they want to come and join our spaces, how are we understanding what we offer them, right? Oh, we're going to give you this building for free. We're going to give you tax incentives to come here. How do we understand how we create good partnerships? And I think Doug has spent a lot of time thinking about that. And I think one of the things that was coming up, Sheena, when you were talking about what's not always measurable, I remember moving to Boston, and within the first 12 months, I realized I had not heard music overhead that would be what I would have heard in Atlanta. I was like, oh, it's not bad music. It's not music I didn't enjoy, but I never heard like an Atlanta artist or the hip hop I would experience on the radio of 4 different stations in my city. It's a very small thing, but it was very telling about who was welcome in this particular restaurant that I'm coming to, right? Didn't mean they weren't good service, all of that, but it was a very small thing, but it was noticeable to who you are talking to and who you are looking for. And so, Doug, when you think about space, you've done a lot of thinking about this, particularly with Max G. Johnson Industries. How did you all think about that, and what made it so special to work in that way, to think about space and infrastructure?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things when I worked for Mr. Johnson was, you know, his philosophy was when they would go to NBA games. I can't believe I'm in Massachusetts talking about Magic Johnson, but you know, I'm sorry in advance. But when he would go to games back when he played, he couldn't understand how no one would build anything around the stadiums. You know, because that's when the stadiums were all downtown and people would drive in downtown and he would be on the buses. So when he retired from the game of basketball, he wanted to work with different companies such as Starbucks or Burger King, Washington Mutual, Aetna, Best Buy, different brands, and tell them what we're going to do is he was going to get a real estate downtown and essentially geofence areas. Then he was going to put anchor businesses and partners in those areas so people could trust them because they're coming from him. But the second part of it was working, there's an organization called NMSDC, which is the National Minority Supplier Development Council, and they help support Black-owned and diverse-owned businesses in the United States. The second part was once you anchor the space, how can you now make sure that Black business owners, and my big learning from him, and I think something that we could all take from including the data that was just shared, was a lot of people want to get jobs. I was thinking of that Black jobs term, you know, I can't get it out of my head. But, you know, we always talk about get a job, get a job, get a job. Well, when I was raised, Ben Davis used to tell me job stands for just over broke. You need to really get a career. And, you know, I know it's a nuance, but I think when you're young, there's certain things people tell you that become formidable. And Magic would always say, I wish we would spend more time on ownership and pushing people to own something that you could sell, that could increase in value to spur inflation, and less time trying to tell everybody, get a job, get a job, get a job. Because if you have 2 jobs and 3 jobs, you don't make money. You know, there's data that shows the more jobs you have, the less money you have, because jobs do not necessarily pay or grow. So when it talked about belonging, it was the real estate to get the land, the anchor names and brands to build trust for that community, and then empowering Black business owners to then move in to fill it out. And then collectively, that environment, if it was in a mixed use space, which is residential on the top and retail at the bottom, then we could start to build micro communities across the United States of America. And we did it, you know, 70 times in different Black communities that were historically underserved, but they were only historically underserved. They weren't less than, they weren't worse than. It was just no one had committed building that sense of belonging where everything came into one place at one time. And I think that goes back to kind of access of funds, you know, how you do it, the process, the timing. And I'd like to add to that, because that was a few years ago. One of the things I learned quite recently, I just moved back from Geneva, Switzerland, and I was living over there for the past 3 years. And my assignment was, I was the head of equity for a company called Richemont, which owns Cartier, Van Cleef & Arpels, everything that like takes your bank account. And one of the things that I learned in that environment was my assignment was to go to all 40 countries that we had boutiques and we had businesses in, and spend 1 week in that country to understand what is equity, what is equality, and what is belonging, so we can understand a lens outside of the US lens. And I could go on and on about what I learned, but I think the biggest learning was access to information and having a single source where you can know the data was the hardest part. And I think this is where, you know, when we start small things in a community environment, how do we scale those? How do we provide those? How do we build those? And I think not knowing where your community lives, not knowing who to contact, not knowing the local events, not being tied in, things are happening all around you, but we're not really connecting the dots in a certain way. For me, it helped me change my career to see how we could use generative AI to load in all the data about different nuances and details, and then people could just type in a question and then have that generate an answer for you that meets you exactly where you are. And I think these are the type of things when we talk about belonging. Sometimes you can't get the real estate, sometimes you can't own a business because you don't have the infrastructure, but you can start building access to data and build forums where you can just be you know, more of an armchair activist, but you can work together with other individuals and start building that connective, close Facebook community that was discussed earlier, so you can start building micro-belonging centers of excellence and then keep growing those out until you can have an environment where everybody feels like they can participate. Having a voice is important, but also having a vote. You have to have a voice and a vote. And I think these are the type of things when we talk about these environments are realistic things that everybody here can actually contribute and do. And I think meeting people where they are and giving people tangible options is so important, because if we want to see these change in these cities to make us feel like we belong, we have to be the ones sometimes to spur that change and realize that no one's going to save us, but we have the opportunity, if we have our gray time, to save others.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah. Feel free. Yes, absolutely. I think I've heard a couple of things, but Doug, you started to talk about, and I want Andre to respond to this piece around trusted advisors, right? Like who comes in, who has the information, who has the data. And so, Andre, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about why this asset frame on this work is critical, why we must do it in a certain way if we're going to be intentional about creating the belonging, and what you've learned from your research around that.
Yeah, and I will strongly piggyback off of Doug, because a lot of what he described comes out in the data. One of the fascinating projects I did, we scraped all the Yelp data from businesses all across the country. we got the race of the owner, we got their revenue. What we found is that Black, brown, and Asian-owned firms actually score higher on Yelp than their white counterparts, but they get less revenue in Black neighborhoods. But what's interesting about that is the adage my elders used to tell me is true. Our ice is just as cold. Our ice is now going. Another point that you made, which is so important in terms of owning our assets, particularly in Black communities. 80% of all commercial real estate is owned by the top 1% of families in the country. So you can go through, actually, on the main street here, you have more Black owners than a lot of places, which, you know, is interesting. But you can go all across the country, whether you're in Atlanta, Boston. Most of the commercial corridors are owned by a few people. So as we start to quote unquote build our assets and grow community, know that we do have to buy back the block. That we need to be strategic to say, hey, it's not just building businesses, it's building businesses adjacent to our Black neighborhoods so that the revenue bleeds. But then finally, I want to be clear about this. Actually, the population that has showed the highest growth in businesses and employer firms across the U.S. have been Black people. During the pandemic, more micro firms were started. Most of them were essentially online retailers, right, that were started across the community. So we do need to embrace this AI and other opportunities to engage in a global market. No question about that. But I say that, I wanted to remind ourselves of this, is that when we talk about Black business, we're doing well right now. Like, don't let anyone discourage you. But the issue is the centuries of discrimination. We simply just have less capital, right? We just have less capital. But we know how to run and start businesses. The next phase of our growth, Black people represent about 14% of the population, but only 2% of employer firms. If we want to see a change, it's not just about starting businesses. We have to start talking about acquiring and merging firms.
You know, can I just, I have a data point here. There's 3.7 million Black-owned businesses in the United States of America, but only 2.7%, which is 161,000, have at least one employee. So that means 3.55 million of the 3.7 million, the only worker is the person who started the business.
Right.
And there's only 161,000 with an employee. So I think, you know, really to the point, it's we can keep starting the businesses, but if we don't support them, merge them, grow them, you know, like we do other areas of our lives, the businesses ultimately, our numbers are going up with the quantity of businesses that we're starting, but we're not able to really reach scale. And I think that's where we become good starters, but that's what we're saying about the importance of community and public-private partnerships to merge those individuals who have that go-getter starter mentality, but still need access to capital and community to grow that into something where they can hold a full-time employee under their realm.
And I'm going to offer one more piece. I think it is also about the type of businesses that we start. So when you talk about what the responsibility of cities or entities is, you know, going for funding for and this is no disrespect to industries in particular, but we tend not to be at the forefront of the next industry. I love a good eyelash boutique, I do. But I bet if we were to do per capita, if Andre was to pull some data, there's too many of them, right? And so we tend not to be in the industries that are also high performing and futuristic in terms of what funding will look like. And I think that does have impact. And so, Sheena, talk a little bit about the partners that are coming to the table and why they're saying yes to understanding that this infrastructure in cities is required of them. Like, what are you seeing in that way?
Yeah, and just to add to the last point as well, Boston Wall Black is in that 2% because we have staff.
Okay. All right.
And
Anybody else have staff? Anybody have staff? Do we have anybody with staff in here?
and,
Okay.
you know, it is a very sobering number, but something that when we hit that mark, someone who a coach that I had at the time had to remind me almost to celebrate it, but also, you know, in a way that it's like, wow, this is a great milestone for Boston While Black, but how sad that in 4 years, you know, we've been able to hit this mark that, you know, people probably that have had businesses for decades haven't been able to. And I agree what Candace is saying around us looking at the industries that we're in, and we also have to feel confident about the industries we're creating, because, I mean, Boston While Black, you know, where you have people that a business owner would know this, but it's a NICS code. Like when you're doing federal funding or getting an EIN number, you have to say what type of company, and I'm always like, I have no idea what type of company we are. We span across so many different industry areas, and it has felt discouraging at times, but I've tried to put my foot down around, no, we are creating something. We saw a need. We created something. There's clearly customers that are buying it, and it's on us to continue to define what this means in the broader industry and specifically for Black people. As far as our partnerships, for folks that are new to Boston While Black, again, we have a membership community structure, and then we also have annual corporate partners as well as corporate event sponsors who are interacting with us for different reasons. But I would say that in the formation of Boston While Black, the reason that this was even a part of how I structured it is because along with belonging for Black people, another important tenet of what we're doing is changing the brand of a city. We are, I'm sure for those of you from Boston or who have talked about Boston at some point in your life, the question, are there Black people in Boston, has come up. You go to other places and you tell people you're from Boston and they, you know, look at you with a furrowed brow like, really? Which is, you know, as someone who's not from Boston, I've been there 20 years, but I had the same perception of the city, even though now it doesn't make sense. Like, of course, there's Black people in Boston, but at that time, you know, there's a narrative that's spun about Boston, and the people that you see in the media representing Boston don't look like what a lot of the city looks like. And so I thought it was important as we were launching, because Black people didn't create the problem of us not belonging in the city, so we can't be the ones solving it. And so I really thought that corporations, universities, local city and state government really needed to take the onus of not only being partners, but actually investing their resources in changing the perception of the city, which you have to change it through people's reality. And so we launched in 2020 with a couple of flagship partners. We now have over 15 partners, and they represent the highest growth industries. You know, Boston is known for, they say, the eds and meds, but there's also a huge tech community, there's biotech and life sciences. So our partners really span across that. And I think in general, they're joining for different reasons. Some of what has come from it, though, is one, people telling us, like, wow, I stayed at this company, or I went to work at this company because this partnership to me signals that they are investing in the Black experience, and even see that they're not necessarily the experts in it. Because I think some of what's happening as we have this ebb and flow around DEI and the corporate conversation around it is around expertise and who really is defining what it means. And I think for some companies, understanding that there needs to be expertise built inside their company, of course, and also they need to partner with those who actually understand the experience of Black people. And so we've been able to hear from our members how much it means to them that they're getting this investment. I would say also on the government side, we have become a conduit for our members to the mayor, the lieutenant governor, other elected officials who, because we have in, you know, really a constituency that they want to get in front of, they are coming in front of Boston While Black members when they want to share information with Black people in the city, when they want to be able to, obviously election times, but really get in front of and have a pulse on what Black people are looking for in Boston. And I think that as we continue to scale and grow, there are so many different ways that we can work with corporate America. One of the challenges that I think is in front of us as a community and as a business is how do we stay true to our values? How do we scale and grow in a way that also continues to center the joy and experience of Black people? And it's really difficult because what we see as impact is not necessarily always what a company sees as impact, or the way that we want to measure is not necessarily how a company wants to measure. And I think that companies are still figuring out in a lot of ways. And we really, back to what I said at the beginning, how do you measure belonging? Like, how do you really measure someone's feeling of being seen and being heard? And then be able to, talk about our ROI on that, I think is really challenging. But there are ways that we've been able to see and have some wins, particularly around our really high visibility events like our family reunion, which many folks in here were at. And, so we, for the fourth summer this year, brought Black people out to, it's called the Seaport now, but essentially South Boston, an area where Black people have not traditionally felt welcomed or been welcomed, and have a family reunion style event where you have everything from line dancing to double dutch to food trucks. And that event has grown in 2021 from 3,000 people to 11,000 people a couple of weeks ago. And so us being able to really raise the visibility around the Black culture that exists in Boston, as well as filling in the gaps, but it's powered by companies, it's powered by corporations.
Really appreciate that, Sheena. And I think one of the things you said that I believe the equity space is still figuring out is how to define and help people understand the expertise of these folks sitting in seats, right? Sometimes people don't want to pay for the brilliance that connects you to a community that you think, oh, I can just understand that. But we know that it shifts when you put people in the right seats. So who's leading inside of your companies? What does your political leadership group look like? Who's creating social networks? I do believe that we haven't quite figured out how to help other people understand that, even though there are very measurable examples, there are pilots where we're saying this has turned out better because said expertise were sitting in the seats, the development experience, some of the programming around affordable housing. The city of Atlanta has built more affordable housing in the last 3 years than we've been built in 20. That's because we understood that affordable housing could look a lot of different ways based on who you were serving. So even understanding who folks are meant that we made different decisions about the type of housing, where we put it, who we worked with to build it, the type of developers who were interested in affordable housing. All those things are different when you bring the right folks to the table, and I think that's what we're seeing. And so you also mentioned, Sheena, sectors, and I think, Doug, you've spent a lot of time thinking about how the tech sector can be a part of creating belonging. And sometimes we don't always run that way first, but what can it do in addition to the actual connecting that we're having in real life?
I think I just want to say just a few things about the power of corporations. People of color, if you just look at the Latino community, the Black community, and the Asian community in America, represent $6 trillion a year in spending. Companies want to connect with us, but sometimes they just don't know how, which goes back to access to information and who's actually in the seat. But it's a very important opportunity for all of us to realize these companies have so much power within cities as it relates to influence, voting, sponsorship, elevating causes, philanthropy, different food drives, et cetera. So we really have to look at who are our corporate neighbors, similar to how we look at other neighbors, and really find out how to tap in and how to work with them, because they are looking to work with us as well. But sometimes we just don't know who's the connective tissue and who is in that seat and in that chair. And I think technology provides a unique opportunity to imagine, my dad is 90 years old, and he would always say to me, can you believe every photo, video, sound, and word ever created in humankind is in your pocket? And I think sometimes we don't even realize the power of the phone and all the data and access to information that we have in our pocket. If you were around 100 years ago and told everybody everything was in your pocket and it went through satellites and just landed there, you'd probably go to prison because people would be like, well, this guy's crazy. What is he talking about? But I think, I moved to work with generative AI because there is such a power that we have created a software program, just not me, but just that has been created, that can calculate things with the power of 3 to 10 human minds, and it's still quite new. If you look at your iPhone, for example, you're on number 15. Chat GPT's on version 4. So if you think of 10 years from now, it'll be the power of 1,000 PhD level brains. So what I'm saying is we need to spend more time understanding how to access information and understanding how to curate and refine it with our insight, and less time researching, logging on. Allow the computer to do the hard part and we do the smart part. And that's the opportunity that we can really build in our community. And sometimes when your kids, I don't have any children, but everyone else around me has them, and they're beautiful, and we love them. We love them. Who doesn't love a child? They're great, especially.
You don't. No,
This guy, he's a comic over here. He said I'm wearing a linen suit. I wasn't ready. But, who doesn't love a child? But the thing is, sometimes we don't listen to the young people because we think they don't know the information, but actually they're the ones that are really on the cutting edge and the front lines of the information, and we need to start giving them the mic and start looking at them for opportunities, because sometimes it only takes one spark, one idea, one insight. And I want to just share a quick story. I was working in advertising, and this is in the year 2020, and I started doing research on who gets paid royalties in the supermarket. So Chef Boyardee is an actual chef. He used to be a presidential chef. His name was Chef Boyardini. And then you have Paul Newman. And I started to realize all the white faces on the food owned the company, and all the black faces were labeled as mascots. So Rastus from Cream of Wheat, Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben. So I'm sitting here going, I don't understand this. But see, sometimes it's a small insight. How do all these food companies pay the families royalties, but then all the other food companies, they don't pay the families? They're labeled as mascots, so they get away from paying royalties. And I think sometimes these are small things that you notice. And I went to PepsiCo, who owned Quaker Oats, who owned Aunt Jemima, and I spent 2 years working with them to retire Aunt Jemima, to remove her off the packaging. So if you want to know why there's no Aunt Jemima anymore, I'm the guy that retired Aunt Jemima. But I tell you this because I think it's important to realize when we were finished, I encouraged PepsiCo to call all the other companies, Mrs. Buttersworth, Eskimo Pie, Rastus from Cream of Wheat, and Uncle Ben, and retire all those food mascots, because I said if we're not going to be equitable to those faces, then we should not have them on our products. And I think sometimes you could say, well, is anybody going to listen? Does anybody care? But the point is, one person's insight, one scratch of an idea with a corporate public-private partnership could change the lives of so many people. And it just begins with being open-minded and giving someone the mic so they can give their opinion, and you being their cheerleader, not their naysayer.
Thank you. Yeah, please. I'm going to get ready to wrap us up, and we're going to open up for some questions if folks have them. So I'm going to give everybody a chance to react. I think, Doug, you're making me think about, I was on a conversation with Microsoft about AI, and we were wanting to use Microsoft to assess biased language in government documents. You all know policy drives government. Many government documents never get reviewed. They were written generations ago. Councilman, everywhere I want to turn, I'm like, no, we have women sitting in seats now. Everything from how benefits are made. One document said, you must be the primary parent to get leave. What's a primary parent? I think both parents are probably primary, right? So when things are built and codified into language like that, you have to assess it, and government documents are bulky and huge. And there was an AI tool that we were looking at to review and point out biased language, but they were like, well, we don't know, one, can our tool actually do that? Then also, what happens to replace and reframe that language? That had to be a human person, the expertise. And they were like, can you sit with us and do that? That's the kind of thing, to your point about the insight of having folks saying, this is unique expertise that we can leverage, that makes companies pay attention. So I really appreciate your example. And I think they're begging us for that. So please lift the ideas, lift the solutions, which is what I spend my days thinking about. And so for the panelists, I'm going to ask you to share one insight, and this could come from your art data, Andre, it can come from BWB experiences, your career, Doug, but as folks think about what they could be doing in their own communities to create greater belonging? Could they be demanding something of institutions? Is there something they could be doing in their individual role from their seat in a corporation? What's one or two ideas that feel really important for them to leave this conversation with, even as we go into Q&A? 1 to 2 sentences, 1 to 2 sentences, just to give us some frame, because I want to leave time for y'all.
I think it's just lean into your superpower. I think you should realize what you're good at, but also know what you're great at, and use that gift from God and double down on it to help the communities that you serve.
All right, you were concise.
2 sentences.
Thanks, Doug.
I would say be a connector yourself. You know, Boston While Black is a community that became a business, but it really came from me just doing this person by person, and really meeting a need that I had for myself. And I think that the more that we take the needs that we have and extend them to other people, I didn't know 10 years ago that this is what this was going to become. And so I really think that our role in cities for all of us is, particularly, you know, folks in this room, I'm sure are pretty civically and engaged, is how can you serve as that for somebody else? How can you bring them forward? And it'll grow into something possibly, or it can really just stay with that one person, which I think is just as important.
Thank you.
I'm going to be very policy-driven. Spread the word on special purpose credit programs. Special purpose credit programs allows for lenders to change underwriting so that you can get business and mortgages at make them much more accessible. Bank of America created a special purpose credit program where you don't have to put down a down payment, for instance. And so look into and get to know special purpose credit programs.
Awesome. Thank you all. So there's an opportunity for you to submit questions through the same app that you have been using, the same text information. It should be showing, yes, it is on the screen. That QR code is there. And I'm going to throw these to our panelists. Andre, I'll start with you. The question was, what has place-specific research and data collection shown you about the epidemic of police violence, increased stress, and lower life expectancy?
You know, again, the police violence did not rise to the level that it lowered life expectancy like in the way we think. Now, there are thousands of variables that were found. It did not rise. That does not necessarily mean it is not impactful. It just didn't reach a level of significance. So I think for the most part we know that it's harmful, but when you're talking about the most significant problems, home ownership has a much more impact than police violence.
Appreciate that. And the question was to both of us. I'll just say from a city perspective, obviously my city is in the national news for lots of things around this conversation. I should just also acknowledge I'm the daughter of a 31-year serving police officer, first Black chief of police in Mississippi post-Reconstruction. So I have a lot of experience thinking about what police officers and public safety officials need. And one of the things that I say from a policy standpoint that has been helpful is to understand local officers. So I don't talk a lot about the national experience of police because Atlanta PD in particular is unique. 3 weapon pulls last year, 3, right? That's very below national data. And that's because we have more training hours than anyone else in our state, right? So there are things that you can demand of your local public safety spaces. We also have PAD, which is a diversion program. Our police do not write tickets. So, right, they don't have interaction in cars, things that reduce the experience of that. And so I'll just name, I think the question is, what do you demand individually of the public safety space where you are? And how does that look different based on what your community needs? So that's one thing I would offer. One of the questions, Sheena, I think it's gonna come to you and probably Doug. What's your advice to Black professionals who leave safer communities for bigger opportunities, but that often come back and feel isolation or experience being the sole Black person in those spaces they've gone to?
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, many of us do feel like we have to make this trade-off of success versus belonging. you know, I was one of these people, and I've met many people in my time in Boston who are there somewhat begrudgingly. They've come for school or professional reasons, and I mean for not 2-3 years, but 10, 15 years, and still feel like, yeah, I'm just here because it's somewhere I know I can prosper, but I still don't really love it here. I think you have to connect to community. There is, obviously, if you're in Boston, join Boston While Black. And, but there are spaces in other places where you can connect to community. The unfortunate part of it, particularly for folks, we have a lot of self-proclaimed introverts in Boston While Black. Everyone claims that they don't like talking to people or don't like networking, and so it helps them to have this channel or avenue to connect with other people. And I know it feels like a burden sometimes on people where they have to go out and seek out community. I lived in DC for a couple of years. I did leave Boston once. I moved to DC, and it felt more of like what I'm trying to create in Boston, where I didn't really have to look for it because it was there. I almost in some ways took it for granted because it was there. And so I know that is what most people are looking for. They want it to kind of be handed to them, the opportunity to create community. But one of our sayings, our mantras in Boston While Black is that you have to create the city you want to live in. And you really have to create the journey that you're trying to have in a city. And that does put some onus on you to go out and find your tribe and look for the people who are doing like-minded things, progressing in the way that you want to. I do hope that, and this is genuinely why we want to scale to other places in partnership with people that are already doing it in other places, filling the gap in places where they don't have it, is because you really shouldn't have to choose between you having an experience that you want to have. People come to us about dating. They come to us all kind of things that they don't feel like they can get, and they're sacrificing that to be in a city where they want to be professionally. And that's something that we want to solve. We don't want people to have to make that choice.
I'll just offer one piece here too, is there are times where I should speak for myself, have been pushing the boulder up the hill in a place where maybe it wasn't everything. And then there have been times where I've been with the wind at my back. And I think you get to choose at different seasons how to do that. So because you go to Boston for 5 or 6 years doesn't mean you don't get to go somewhere else for 2 or 3 and then come back. And so I think we can go and be rejuvenated. I worked at Spelman Morehouse and Morehouse School of Medicine, but I've also worked at UCLA, Columbia, right? Very different experiences. And I go back and forth because sometimes you got to go get what you need. And so if it is a time where you felt drained or pushed, I think our ancestors did not do this work for us to be suffering. And so go get your replenishment, go do that, and then go back to the work, whatever that may look like. So I think there are seasons where sometimes it is required of us to be doing what Sheena is doing. I remember sitting across from her at a cafe when we first met, and I was very
we
clear.
were having drinks. I don't know if it was a cafe.
Okay,
yeah.
we were having drinks. She's gonna call me out on my birthday. Okay, we were having drinks, but I remember feeling very clear that my time in Boston was limited, right? And yet I come back here all the time. I spent days, and so again, that doesn't mean I won't come back to Boston, right? So understand that there are times and seasons for that, and make sure you're taking care of yourself in the midst of doing that work for others and serving. Doug, anything go ahead, Andre.
I was just gonna say, sometimes there's no easy way to grow, and I think that's kind of what I learned when I moved to Geneva, Switzerland. I was the only American at my company. So, I mean, you think you're talking about the only black. I'm saying I'm the only native English speaker. So it was definitely a perspective that was very hard for me. But I think over the course of time, you start to realize you are growing. And sometimes there's no easy way to be the first or easy way to be on the front line. And that wasn't how I thought before I went there, because I was always in environments that you had some participation to create. But I think, with the world going the way it is, some of the best opportunities are going to be anchored with your family, with your loved ones, and your job or your career is not going to provide at a certain age, all the loving and the hugging and all the things. When you get past a certain point, it does become very competitive. At the bottom, it's kind of like a mountain. People are with you, but then as you get higher up the food chain, it's a little bit harder to find allies. So I just think it is great when you could find the community, but if you're following your purpose, sometimes you're going to realize the hard way there's no easy way to grow. but if you can help build communities, people will appreciate it, because the beautiful thing about these communities is that they spread, and you become, create something that you dreamed you always had for you.
Yes. Our Richard has a question. I'm gonna.
All right. No questions about church.
My house. I want to specifically ask about the power of place,
Yeah.
permanent place. For example, we do have this facility. We have Featherstone, the cottagers, a Black women's organization, own their building. There are 5 businesses on Circuit Avenue that own this place. And I remember in my early entrepreneurial career, I could go to Bob the Chef's or Daryl's on Thursday, or I could go to the P&B on Friday, and I've kind of lost those now. I find myself on Thursday, where am I going to go? I can go to the seaport, but I don't want to go unless I know somebody's going to be there. So I really feel for all the progress that we've made, we seem to have lost, and I know there are a lot of Bostonians here who are with me, we've lost a place where we can go and know that I could see what I'm looking for on a Thursday or a Friday. And so, and here actually, home ownership is driven place. Here it has. So talk to me about these cities where, well, it used to be the Fox Trap in the old days in D.C. I know I'm dating myself. I knew if I got in D.C. on Thursday or Friday, I got an amen from somebody here, okay, I could go to the Fox Trap, and I would see who I needed to see. So I know, I hang out, okay. I go to church too. But anyway, so tell me about the power of place. Yeah, thank you.
I'll start just from a community perspective, and I'm sure from a research perspective. First of all, Richard, are you still looking for places to go out? Oh, for research, okay. I think she got it back. So many things running through my mind. One, again, we've been very intentional about grounding what we're doing in a place because of the importance of the connection between place to your sense of belonging. But what you're talking about, physical gathering spaces, is a huge challenge in Boston. And I think that it adds to the narrative and the feeling that there are no Black people there, because I actually live a very Black life in Boston, but because I've curated my life a lot. And so I know the places and spaces to be, but if you're just someone who's journeying through the city, you don't know what to do. You don't know where to find people. And outside of professional networking events, it's really hard to just run into someone. One of the things I loved about living in DC, for folks that have been to DC, I worked upstairs from this place called Stan's. It's kind of like Slade's, Biff's in Boston. And so, but it was where, a lot of Black government workers went after work. I could go down the street to park. There was actually a website called DC Happy Hours where I could see where the specials were that day. And a lot of the work, even with and outside of Boston While Black, that I've done in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is to really get across the message that when we're talking about physical gathering spaces, social spaces, it's not trite. It's not about drinking. It's not about people being irresponsible. It's about people having safe spaces that play the music that they want, that reflect their culture and their being, to be in community with each other. And sometimes that looks like a bar or lounge. Sometimes it looks like a special event. I worry, too, about Boston and places like that that don't have enough of those types of spaces, because now that I'm kind of a champion for Boston, when I hear people say that they're leaving because there's no Black people, I'm like, no, there really are. And then the next question, they're like, okay, so where should I go? And I have to look at my phone on the BWB hub to figure out, like, okay, what day of the week is it where I can send them to? And it really shouldn't be like that. There really should be more spaces that are owned and operated by us. As someone that does events, there's a lot of asking that I have to do to use space that I'd rather not do, and really getting people to understand our culture and our community. And so I think that I would assume, I don't know this, but in some of these places where we have more Black progress, that there is more ownership of spaces by us as well, because we're able to gather safely in the ways that we want to.
I'll just offer, if you are in government spaces, there's a ton of funding that government should be doing for legacy Black businesses. That's to Richard's question. I do not think we fund them enough. I think that we let businesses kind of collapse because oftentimes some of the most significant Black businesses don't have the infrastructure resource. And so what can government do from a policy perspective to, one, hold their space for them so that as rent rises, you cover the difference? In addition to, how do you fund and help them grow the infrastructure to maintain their businesses? Because many of those things are just gone, so that's a problem. I think I'm not moderating the Q&A. I think we've got a mic passed.
All right. Hello, my name is Edgar Artie. I am a born and bred Bostonian, but I reside in Cambridge, Massachusetts right now, so don't hold that against me. Shout out to my folks. All right. First and foremost, I want to thank the panel. I think what you presented to us was a wonderful, wonderful discussion. Shana Collier, you are killing it in Boston, and I love talking and breaking bread with you to talk about the issues we have. I would just say to all of us here, as we are in different spaces, professional, entrepreneurial, I think one of the challenges that I always discuss, and this is always going to be in the forefront, is that Boston has a problem with their messaging overall. I urge everyone, wherever you are in your space, to talk to your elected officials, all your leadership, and say we need better representation on the outside, the upper deck, because we're killing it within, but on the outside, when you see overall commercialing or anything, I still see Irish leprechauns, and I want to, exactly what you said, I want to remove some of those mascots and have people like us in Boston representing, because we have some real people doing some real things, especially this panel, that are making it happen, and that's where it is. It needs to go way up top. That messaging is important for then outsiders to know that there are Black people in Boston doing real things.
You know, I agree. It's all a marketing camp. I mean, it's all messaging. Yeah, Boston doesn't do a good job of telling its own story, absolutely.
Okay, I'm a former deputy mayor of a township of Teaneck, New Jersey. Very multicultural town. When the war broke out in the Middle East, the council put together a resolution indicating that Jews' concerns are more important than other people's concerns. It moved forward in an effort to destroy the town between Muslims and Palestinians and Jews. So to add just a little bit to this, the hair processing places are run by Koreans. The gas stations are run by East Indians. The 7-Elevens are run by East Indians. And when it comes to Black concerns, Black people not only don't vote, but they're afraid to express Blackness as a possibility.
Thank you for sharing.
You know, I will say this in relation to that. We did a study where we looked at well-being as it correlates to the well-being of other groups. And there's no surprise here. When you invest in Black people, everyone's well-being increases. There is this, you can clap that up, right? There is this myth of a zero-sum game that we're playing, that investment in one group will take away from another. And it is one of the deadliest tricks, that white supremacist tricks that is played on us all. And so, and we all have a bit of that in us. So we do need new ways to measure well-being, belonging. We can't frame everything as a black, white, Muslim, Jewish, these kind of dichotomies. We really do need to look at our collective well-being as a whole. And just one other point, that when you're talking about belonging, it's a multifaceted thing. Certainly, we need organizations to help us see each other in spaces where we don't. But understand that we live in a market-based society. We can change the corporations, government structures, with organizing, with mobilizing, that they have to respond to us. And so for me, I'm always like, this is not a matter of how do we have to assimilate into things. This is a matter of can we organize to say, hey, if you're not hiring us at a certain rate, if you're not doing these things, we're not going to purchase your goods. And that will change the culture. In many ways, you know, the DEI programs, they did sort of create a sort of this thing where they could shuttle a person in the human resource office, and that was their way of dealing with diversity. You know, at the end of the day, some of these corporations have to respond to us. So I do like a lot of let's get along and let's do these things. Yeah, I do. But the reality is, I'm like, no. We can influence and make room for ourselves when we need to.
I think someone has the mic. Feel free to just stand up and.
Hi, also thank you. My name is Jai Rogers, went to Howard, from Dallas, Texas. Family is in Yazoo City, Mississippi.
Greenwood, go
Yeah,
ahead,
you already
girl,
know.
right down the street.
All right, so I guess my question is around language and translation of what we are speaking of. I work in recruiting tech consulting for public sector, federal, city, local, so I relate to a lot of you on this panel. And oftentimes in these conversations, it feels reminiscent, and it's reflecting folks who have already left their towns or left cities that their families are from or the history of their family. And I oftentimes struggle trying to translate these. And I use what I do professionally as the example because in recruiting consulting, specifically in public tech, it's translating policy to technologists, translating public work to people who have worked in private, translating business models to people who don't understand the language of VC capitalism, all of those things. And so what would you say, like me as a case study? I've heard everything that you have said. I'm sitting at the dinner table with my family on Sunday in Yazoo City. I'm trying, or Dallas, I'll use them as an example, trying to equip them with a greater sense of belonging, a longer life expectancy, more capital as a family. How do I translate what we are saying as the privilege to families in towns who don't have access, who don't know that this information exists, and these conversations are not turning to them and saying, look at what we know, or hear what we know?
I mean, I'm gonna push just a little bit to start. One is saying, like, I go to Greenwood a few times a year, and Greenwoodians absolutely know what they want. I think Black people in the South have, for a long time, been very clear, and I do think that we are actually seeing a return from young Black professionals back to those spaces. You look at the mayor of Jackson, the mayor of Birmingham. These are leaders who are born and bred in those cities. What they are fighting against often is a state leader who does not have the same values. I don't want to get into a deep political conversation here. None of these views are the views of my city or my mayor. Let me just say that. But I don't think people don't know what they want. I think what we are responsible for is creating the infrastructure for it to exist. And if you are from the South, not like I left the South and I haven't been back in 50 years, but like I grew up in the South in a very like 12 stoplight town, the conversations are just like, how do you put people in the seats, right? We have not had a state superintendent or even a superintendent of the largest school district who has said that we should have African American history, right? He's like, I don't believe that. So I think they're there, and I think they know. I think it is up to us to say, what are the resources required to help them get what they already want? Fannie Lou Hamer knew what she needed. And I think we often minimize, because the language is different, to your point, but I think we just need to listen to them and then help them create the thing they already want. I don't like the intellectualism going into spaces and communities trying to do it our way. I think it is actually honoring what's already on the ground in those spaces and amplifying it.
I just want to say, I think this is the key to everything, is really the question you're asking. How do you get people that are already baked into a certain formula or lifestyle to open up for new information, to widen their own spectrum that could improve the whole? And I think when I was writing my book, they would always remind me of this saying, take it easy on the reader. Take it easy on the reader. And I think that was something that's very important. You have to meet people where they are. And I think the first thing I would suggest is YouTube has videos for so many different things. And if you look at the data, more people are watching YouTube than are watching Netflix, than are watching Hulu. And it's a source of education. Also, free certification programs. You could go to Google, you can go to Coursera, you can go to universities, and encourage people to try to, step slowly into new ways, or inspire them with very easy, digestible ways to communicate, because people are so locked into what their career is. And I feel like all this information in the world has also made people get narrower. They're not getting wider. They're like, I only know this, I only know this, I only know this. Now by the time they're in their older years, sunset years as my family calls them, they're so locked into something narrow that it's very hard to get them to learn about VC language, how to invest. I remember when I was gonna go work into AI, I literally only knew Allen Iverson. AI was literally Allen Iverson. I'm not even making this up, because people say it, but I was like, what, is he coming back? He's in the big three? What's going on with this guy? But I think the important thing about it is when people were saying AI, I actually didn't really understand what it was until someone explained it to me, like I was on Gerber Stage 4 baby carrots, that we've taken the whole internet and we've put it into a large language model, which is essentially a program that operates like the human brain. So you put all the internet in a human brain, and then you ask it questions. But how do you ask the question? And that's something called prompt engineering, and I think we could all improve, because we have to learn how to talk to these models. When I built a model, it was from an insight where someone said, you know what you can do? You can build your own language model and put all the data in it you want, and then attach that to the internet so you can build out a specialty. And then I was like, oh, that's cool. They should make one for sports. They should make one for design. They should make one for music, which will.i.am's doing. So then you start to learn, oh, that's what people are doing. They're basically creating their own treasure chest of all the data they want, and they're attaching it on something, and it's processing through a computerized brain, and that's how they get the information. Then I was like, oh, that's cool. How could I do that? But when people just say these terms, I think we're losing people in the language before they even get a chance, because they sound so big and so scary. So I think we really do need to encourage people through certification programs, YouTube, or really explaining things on a fundamental level. And I think sometimes it starts with us being the models for that, because the message is important, but equally as important is the messenger.
I'll just add, I'm responding from some of what I think you're asking, or I'm hearing in what you're asking, being a transplant to Boston and starting something called Boston While Black, and talking about creating community for people in Boston, not in somewhere where I grew up. And a very important tenet of value of what we're doing is honoring the people that are from the city, and the culture and the history that has already existed, the culture that exists now. And there are a number of different ways that we do that. I do that, from who I hire to work at Boston While Black, to both on the employee team, but also vendors and others that we create events with. The reunion event that I mentioned is very much about honoring the history, the traumatic history, in that case, that Black people have had with certain parts of town and trying to reopen it and re-invite them into spaces in a different way. But a lot of it is done through the council of people that are from the city. We, in our membership, have over 1,100 members now, and at one time it was 70, 30, 60, 40 transplants. We have more Native Bostonians now that are members of Boston While Black. And I think it's because, people were suspicious in the beginning. They're kind of watching what we're doing, trying to understand why someone not from Boston needs to be talking about being Black in Boston. I think over time, and I think this stems from me personally, and also what values that we have on our team is we really honor and listen to the people that are from there and that have grown up there. And over time, I think people feel the genuine spirit and intention that we have, and so that they do feel invited into the conversation. We're on a panel, so we're kind of having a certain level of conversation, but a lot of the experiences that we have, back to the need for physical spaces and just experiences writ large, is just inviting people into space. Some of it doesn't even really need to happen through conversation. People feel it when they're invited into a space in a different way, and we're unlocking their city, even though they're from there. There's places in the city they haven't interacted with in this way. And so feeling this invitation from Boston While Black then opens them up to a conversation about, oh, what else are you doing? Or how can I be a part of it? Or how can I be a member? I'm glad you asked that. Even, I don't know if this is totally what you were asking, but I'm glad that you asked that question, because I do want to just say, like, we are doing this with intentionality, even as we think about going other places. I'm not going to Austin or Portland or Phoenix trying to tell them how to be Black. We would partner with people in that city that are already building community. We're saying here we have a formula for it, our model as a way to do it, but it's really for the people from that city to lead it.
Great.
You
We
know,
have one.
just one response to that, and typically I lead with data, but this is more anecdotal. Told you about the person who took me in. I can't say this enough, that we need to leverage our places of convening and our leaders to spread the information we need. That what we're doing right now is just that. And there used to be formalized in churches. There used to be formalized in barbershops. There are new spaces that we must have these scribes who are presenting the information. If you go into Jubilee, you know that you see the older man with the bell, and there were people assigned to do that role. I like to think I'm handsome and smart and I can give all the information to everybody. I can't, right? We need people in all of our communities who are those scribes, ringing the bell. And so for me, it is to have those people take in the people who need the information. I know Val Mosley is in the back, one of the folks in this community doing great work. She's taken in, literally grab her up, taken in hundreds of folks in the financial service industry, not only in terms of mentorship, but in her home, right? We have to do that. We have got to get back to taking someone in. So for me, I think, get to your point, that we need for people to know this information, and we need to maximize the power of place. But we also need to get that to those traditions of who's going to be the scribe, who's going to ring the bell.
I want to just reinforce Andre's point here. Val she's much too modest, but she purchased a legacy property here that was owned by a very well-known Harlemite, Joe Overton. It was a summer White House for the Civil Rights Movement. And she has taken that model times 10. It is one of those places that I talked about. There's always something going on her porch. She's right across from the inkwell. She's taken legacy excellence to another level. Please give her a hand, really.
Yes, yes.
And Kahina Van Dyke has done the same thing.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and I'm thrilled to be here from representing Fidelity Investments with Wendy John. I have a question, and it's somewhat tied to the comment before about, you know, being in a place for a period of time and then going somewhere else. I think if most of us are honest, many of us were raised in communities and encouraged to leave our community. And so I think to some extent what I want to ask about, because there have been other conversations in this series about developing strategies, and I guess I wonder what your thoughts are on strategies around, you can leave, but it's really important to go back to where you came from, because I think a lot of us, I mean, I'm from the Caribbean originally. We talk about the brain drain, and it is not enough to sort of sit somewhere else and comment about what's not happening in the place from which you're from if you're not actually doing things to help make it better. So I'm curious about the thoughts around a formal strategy that encourages leaving to improve, but going back to also improve.
I'll say this: Detroit Future Cities is an organization, think tank in Detroit, and they have an initiative to bring back the black middle class to neighborhoods that historically that have been so. Now they obviously they did not tell people to just leave. The economic conditions compel people to leave, and that's generally the case. But there are hundreds of places throughout the United States in which there has been an outward migration of the middle class, that now the home values are even lower. But what we were seeing all across the country is that black people are going back to those places, buying the homes, buying the commercial property, and it's reviving those communities. The Livernois 6 Mile, we did a study, it's called Investment Without Displacement, where we showed that there's been significant investment in this Livernois 6 Mile neighborhood, but not the displacement. You've actually seen increase in population, increase in education, increase in income, increase in home lending, but not the displacement of black people. It is possible. It is possible, but we must be strategic. What are the specific neighborhoods, the specific commercial corridors, and we need to invest in the people who actually live there. When you invest in outsiders, that money goes outside. When you invest inside, it's literally the definition of community development. So it is possible to do these things, but you have to be intentional. You have to talk about buying property. You have to talk about creating community, but it is possible.
I'll just add, as a being from Albany, which I talked about, right, as my place of belonging, but I would never live there again. But it is because I was encouraged to leave, and I was even blocked by my mother at times when I tried to come back because of the lack of opportunity there. And so part of a couple of years before starting Boston While Black, one of the reasons I switched careers, because I mentioned I have my master's in education, I started to have almost like an existential crisis around the fact that I had been so poured into as this one honor student, AT, et cetera, but my community hadn't been developed. And I started to really feel a weight around that why had I been given these opportunities? I went to Spelman, Harvard, my best friend dropped out in 11th grade. And so I would say I'm still on this journey. Part of why I'm doing the things I'm doing is to create a model for my home and my hometown, meaning, and figuring out how I can invest back into the place that I'm from, because we are told to leave for better opportunities, but I do think that I personally feel a responsibility to the place where I'm from to be able to invest back into it and want to get to the place where I'm able to. I do think it's a great conversation to have. I've actually tried to convene with other people from Albany who have got out, as we say, to be able to talk about, how we invest back in our hometown, because it really is going to be up to us to improve it.
Question, so we're going to go right here.
Hi, quick question, 2 questions.
The speakers will be here after, so we're going to close out. Feel free to come and talk to them after, but this is going to be the last question.
Oh, I teach students, elementary through high school, STEM, coding, science, engineering, AI, in New York City. And the question I have is, we started introducing AI 2 years ago to our high school students, and then last academic year, to our elementary school students. The question I have is, I want to center more and more in social justice. So are there data sets that are out there that I can use so my students could actually analyze the data more? And possibly, are there ways that my students can create their own code or APIs so that they can insert more equitable data sets into the sphere?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, anyone here can create their own AI, and I think that's really the beauty of it if we're not scared of it. And as you were saying about data sets and thinking about Boston While Black, what would happen if you loaded every single thing about Boston, every social event, every nightclub, every single piece of data into one data set? And then people could say, what do I do on Thursday? And it gives you every single thing you could do. It gives you the capacity, the address, the reservation. You can create these models, and that's really what I would encourage you to do. But we could talk offline about gathering different data sets. We worked with McKinsey, World Economic Forum, and people were very happy to share with us their data sets if they believe in your idea. So I think that's a real opportunity. I want to say to the last woman who asked about moving home, I recently moved back to my hometown, and my family didn't really want me to do it. They kind of wanted you to do it because they're older, but they were like, why would you move back to Bridgeport? You just left Switzerland. And I was like, well, must be the drugs. No, I didn't. No, that's not, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Come on, BWB. I'm just playing, BWB. I'm just playing. No, but I think the thing is there are a lot of mixed messages when you do go back home because, you know, your family is like, don't come back. But I found it very centering to go back, and now that you have a couple dollars, you know, buy real estate, make developments, rent different places to students, Airbnbs. And I think sometimes our hometowns are undervalued when you compare them to other places in the world. And it really does provide an opportunity for us to have that economic freedom and familiarity, because now everybody is a professional. You can get your lawyer and professional services. So I think there is a value in coming home. And I think that's something that, you know, I'm just experiencing for 2 months. Maybe the honeymoon will wear out, but I do like for 2 months in the summer coming home and kind of being familiar. But I do think there's a huge opportunity there, you know, that we could all explore, because once you see the world, you have that perspective of global, but now you have the access to do something local.
Awesome. Please give our panelists a round of applause. As Carlene said, we'll be here to answer any questions. Would love to get on a data conversation. I have a ton of it that I think is great. Sheena, we'll turn it over to you to close. And thank you all so much for joining us this evening.
All right. I just want to give so many thank yous. Thank you to Candace for shepherding us through this conversation.
And it's Candace's birthday.
And it's Candace's birthday. Yes.
Yeah, open bar on her. Let's go.
So
community building.
Candace could be celebrating her birthday. She could be at the DNC, I'm sure.
Day to ya. Happy birthday. Let's go.
All right, Black folks always in community. All right, we have to finish the panel, but thank you for your joy. Thank you for your joy. Yeah, so thank you to Candace. Thank you so much to Andre and Doug. Doug, who we cold called, didn't even know each other before this.
She called me and she's like, I'm Boston While Black. I'm like, is that a noun? Is that a verb? I don't know. Is that a participle? I don't know. But I love it. Thank you so much. Your community is incredible.
And Andre,
thank you so
like
much.
I mentioned, who I've followed your research forever, and really am grateful that someone is lifting up the assets of Black people, and think that it's really important for us to continue to speak that language in that way. Again, thank you to Richard and Karen and the Charles Ogletree Institute for hosting us. Yes, and this is sacred ground that we're on. Definitely, if you all don't know Charles Ogletree, encourage you to look him up. As Richard mentioned at the beginning, an amazing leader that I had the fortune of being able to meet before he passed. Overall, I just want to say that I'm so fueled by this conversation and really look forward to, in the communities that people come from, you going back and figuring out how you're going to build community in those places. There are ways that you can do it that require infrastructure like Boston While Black is building, but really there's individual ways that all of us could be better connecting each other to information resources and each other in a time where we know that loneliness and isolation are on the rise. The Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health crisis in this country. Remote work is here to stay, and so cities have a lot of work to do to really attract people. I've said to our mayor that, there's someone right now who's living in Atlanta and getting a degree from Harvard, and they're okay with that. So what does that mean for places that need to really attract and retain talent? And I think as Black people who, as I mentioned, we shouldn't have to make this trade-off between our professional success and our sense of belonging and safety. And the cities, the companies, the institutions that say that they want us and want to attract us and keep us, whether it's our hometown or whether it's a new place, have a duty to us to really invest in the experiences that we are having in cities, making sure that we're connected to each other, to resources, to make sure that we stay in those places. So Boston While Black is the way that we're doing this in Boston, through membership, through partnership, through sponsorship, and beyond. We'll look to deepen in Boston, which is our headquarters, through hopefully physical space, as well as other things like data insights and investing in tourism and talent, recruitment and attraction. And we also look to be in your city and other cities around the country. And so please continue to stay informed with us. There was cards on your seat. There's a QR code up here just as a way for us to capture your information, know who you are. Thank you, Tamasha. Tamasha, you are a great attendee for us to know who you are. And so we really want to be in conversation with you, whether it's about the place that you're in, whether it's about an idea that you have, whether it's about ways to bring more joy to Black people. And I'm looking forward to coming back to this historic place a year from now and beyond and talk about how we are all experiencing more of a sense of belonging and joy in our cities. So thank you.
Thank you.